Welcome and thank you so much for joining us to today's Reckoning to Rise. We are so thrilled to have all of you joining us here for today's actual series kickoff on today. We're so excited to be able to dig deeper into Reckoning to Rise. We've had a fantastic time with all of you this month and even on last month's kickoff to this event with our documentary release, and the fire is going to continue today as we dive deeper into this Reckoning series, as we go deeper into what it takes for businesses to thrive and to thrive in place. Today, we've got a great lineup of speakers who are joining us, and those speakers are going to continue the pace, continue the momentum with each one of you. And so we welcome you into this room, we welcome you into this space and into the conversation, and encourage you to begin the dialogue. Share this in your chat, share this on Facebook, share it on Twitter, share this everywhere, and encourage the conversation to continue with us everywhere that you are with us here with the Center for Economic Inclusion. I'm Tawana Black, the founder and CEO of the Center, and I'm honored to be able to have these conversations with you all throughout all of Black History Month as we take on not only the racial disparities that have impacted our communities for generations, but also the economic impact that we can have when we close racial wealth gaps in our communities. We want to jump right into the conversation and begin to share some information with you about what's taking place in our communities right now and what we're going to have happening with Reckoning to Rise here taking place on the stage today. I want to welcome you all and remind you of our social media handles that you can be sharing in the chat and sharing on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter right now on the stage. Keep in contact with us, chat about this, use the hashtag Reckoning to Rise as you chat, as you're on Instagram, and don't just chat with us through today's conversation. Keep it going with us after today. Reckoning to Rise and at Econ Inclusion. You also will pick up the handles as you chat with us. We'll be chatting and streaming throughout all of today's conversation and sharing the handles of our speakers. So please also link them as you share the conversation today. We want to encourage you to also be sure that you take advantage of lunch from our BIPOC-owned restaurants. Remember, if we don't buy local, we'll be saying goodbye to those local-owned restaurants. So be sure that you take full advantage of lunch from those different vendors and really support them. We've got some wonderful restaurants here in our own community. So be sure that you take full advantage of lunch with one of them on today if you haven't already. We want to be sure that we take advantage of knowing who is in the Zoom room with us today. We've got an amazing audience of folks who have joined us. We've been blessed by so many people registering for this Reckoning series each week, over 200 people joining us. And as you see again today, we've got a great mix of sectors represented in the Zoom room here. So 222 folks signed up. We know there are more participating all around, and we've got folks from every sector, the private sector, public sector, out in our community, folks in philanthropy signed up to be able to reckon with the depths of racism that have taken place for so many generations, and more importantly, to reckon with the solutions that come directly from Black communities, Black business owners, Black leaders who know what it takes to be able to move our economy forward by centering the very businesses who've been on the fringes for far too long. We're excited that you're in the room. We're excited that you're bringing your own ideas, solutions, and investment opportunities to the forefront. And at the Center for Economic Inclusion, we're thrilled to be able to create this platform for Reckoning to Rise together here with each one of you. Today, we want to bring us back to a place where we started and remembering why it is that we started this Reckoning platform. We released the Reckoning to Rise documentary that's still available on our YouTube page in December and in January for you all to be able to understand what it's been like for Black business owners who not only are impacted by the disparities in our community for generations, who've not only been impacted by COVID-19 and by the pandemic of racism, but who've had to navigate this treacherous territory of trying to be able to grow their businesses with lending practices, banking and investment practices, and purchasing practices that are not equitable to those of their white peers. And we want to start off with a few facts as we jump into today's conversation. And we'll have a couple slides that'll play for you to help illustrate those facts right now. We know that our business owners are not competing at the same rate as our others. When we look at median family wealth by race and ethnicity, we see drastic gaps between what our white families are earning as it relates to our wealth and how that wealth translates. And we know that that is directly tied not just to the effort that any particular family or worker puts forward, but to historic policies created by our federal government that gave white families advantages to being able to not only purchase homes, but retain those homes and pass down that wealth generation after generation, such that Black and Latino families were put behind in our ability to be able to move forward. The same as it relates to our Indigenous families and Asian families, our ability to be able to gain wealth that allows us to move forward in our communities. So we look at our next slide, we know that this transcends then as we think about how white business owners are positioned in our economy to be able to move forward and grow their businesses. White business owners, according to this data from the Federal Reserve Survey of Community Sciences, shows that white business owners have 3 times the wealth of their Black counterparts. That wealth allows those business owners to not only grow and expand their businesses, but cut additional business opportunities to be able to grow their businesses. I'll acknowledge for you, my team is letting me know my bottle's showing. I'll acknowledge for you that is a bottle of black cherry soda and not an alcoholic bottle as we're in the middle of the day. So I'll let you know that as our team is letting me know I should move the bottle. But white business owners have 3 times the wealth of their Black counterparts and are not able to move the needle. We noticed also from one of our participants that you're not able to see the slides, so we'll be sure we get tech support out so that you can have that information in the chat about how to be able to see the slides as well. We also note in our next slide that we have opportunities for our business owners to be able to address their credit challenges are not the only challenge that are keeping our business owners from being able to move forward in their wealth building. When we look at Black business owners compared to their white peers, we find that even when their credit are credit worthy, they're not able to obtain the same amounts of funds that their white peers are being offered. That means when we're operating in the banking industry, when we're taking advantage of those opportunities that may come even prior to things like PPP, we find that Black business owners are not having the same opportunities presented to them and being able to pursue that opportunity in the same way as their white peers, even those business owners who have more than $1 million in revenues. We're going to talk about that with our panelists on today. And as we look at our next slide, we have opportunities to still be able to also improve the access to that business credit when we think about our approval rates. When we look at Black business owners in this slide, with data again coming from the Federal Reserve Bank, we find that Black business owners who had good personal and business credit were still not approved for loans at the same rate as their white business owners who had the same good personal or business credit, with a significant gap between those two groups as it related to their approval rates and moving forward in personal financing for those business loans. Our next slide, please. We have opportunities here for us to not only see improvements occurring as it relates to those lending practices, but when we have those improvements occur for Black business owners, we will have significant impacts occur for our entire economy. And that's where we focus a lot of today's conversation and this entire focus with our Reckoning series. If 15% of Black-owned businesses had employment parity, that would add 600,000 new jobs to the U.S. economy, adding $55 billion to that U.S. GDP. $55 billion. That is the imperative we spent a lot of time talking about in last week's Reckoning series, and a place where we want to continue to focus our attention, that economic impact that must not be left on the table unanswered for, a place that we must continue to draw our attention to think about the role of every business, every bank, every one of us who has purchasing power, to ensure that we're not only driving procurement decisions and supplier diversity decisions, foundation decisions, and nonprofit decisions, but really having a line of sight toward how those decisions grow family-sustaining jobs at Black-owned businesses, how we ensure that that occurs in place in Black neighborhoods, and how we have appropriate valuation of those businesses. We're going to reckon with that today in our conversation with our panelists. We want to move to our next slide here as we think about how we center these amazing guests who are experienced, in-depth leaders who are working across not only our own community, but across the country. I'm thrilled to welcome Pamela Lewis, who is the Executive Director of the New Economy Initiative and a non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, who is coming to us from Detroit, Michigan. I'm thrilled to welcome Anisha Murphy, who's the Director of Community Advancement in the Twin Cities for the Community Reinvestment Fund, and an entrepreneur and attorney in her own right who is helping Black business owners all across the nation and certainly across Minnesota ensure that their businesses are thriving and delivering amazing results across our community. And our own partner and business owner himself, D'Angelo Spigetson, who is also leading NAO Partners Incorporated, a business that is helping developers, helping Black business owners, and helping community-based institutions and governments ensure that they are delivering results in our communities that are equitable and growing our economy. Help me welcome each of them to our Zoom platform for Reckoning to Rise Together. Welcome each one of you. Thank you so much for joining us on today. It's great to have each one of you, and I'm so excited to be welcoming three friends to the conversation. We're all familiar with one another, but I want to take a moment to allow each one of you to do your own introductions and tell our audience a bit about the work that you do and what brings you to this particular focus area at this particular moment. Can I start with you, Pam?
Can you hear me? Good. Thank you for having me, Tawana. It's so nice to see you and be with you and to share this time with D'Angelo's and Anisha. Pam Lewis out of Detroit, Michigan. And I represent actually philanthropy's role in this conversation. I had a project called the New Economy Initiative that sits within the Community Foundation in Southeast Michigan. And we're focused on grant dollars and making grants to nonprofits that are supporting entrepreneurs and small businesses in the Metro Detroit community. So if you think of CDFIs, microfinance organizations, practical assistance providers, community development organizations, we have been catalyzing a lot of programmatic support, funding these organizations and making sure that they function as a network so that anyone that has an idea and a will to start and grow a business can actually do so. We don't want their limitation in terms of access to capital or access to networks to get in that way. So that's the work that I've been working on for, 10 years now. And so happy to be here with you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to do a gender balance and go to you, my friend, Mr. Spigetson.
Thank you, Tawana, and for the rest of the panelists, happy to be on with you all today. D'Angelo Spigetson, CEO and founder of NAO Partners, Inc. We're a human-centered planning and real estate development firm working on over 110 acres of master plan communities in the Twin Cities and across the country. We are now a national firm, thanks to 2021 happening, focused on bridging that gap between real estate development, community engagement, and finance. It's often an intersection point where the silos of our industries and the built environment really hamper the ability for people to be creative, especially people in Black and brown communities. And so we want to be that intersecting point to drive change and transformation.
Excellent. And Anisha, welcome to the stage. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Tawana. Hello, everyone. My name is Anisha Murphy. It is an honor, I should say, to be on a panel with such distinguished panelists. I'm super excited to be here today. I am the Director of Community Advancement at the Community Reinvestment Fund USA, which is a national CDFI. We provide alternative capital solutions to small businesses and nonprofits who are traditionally either underbanked or underestimated and aren't able to receive capital through traditional financial streams. In addition to that, like Tawana said, I own my own small business law firm, Just Law LLC, where we use the law to break the silos between law and business and grow thriving and successful businesses, BIPOC businesses, I should say, throughout the Twin Cities. So super excited to be here today and to be on this panel.
Thank you all so much for those introductions. I want to jump right into this conversation, and I want to start with history. And I think where you ended there, Anisha, focusing on the law relates to policy so much, and there are so many layers that have led us to this point of undercapitalization, disenfranchisement, and those layers may start with policy, could start with history, but from your perspectives, what layers have led us to this point and require our attention, require the reckoning that we're here to do today and through this series and through our work, such that we can start to peel back those layers and understand where we should put our pressure points and put our attention in order to address the situation that we find our business owners in today. Let any of you jump in.
Go ahead, Pam.
Well, one of the layers that I think about because of the work that we're in has to do with access to capital. And, what does the federal government do in terms of how they provide loans and support to small businesses? And I do think that if you follow the SBA data, even 7A loan data, even before the pandemic, you'll find that, 2019, 6% of those $20 billion went to actual Latinx businesses, 3% went to Black businesses. And I'm starting to wonder if there's a design problem because the loans are so large. And you look at the types of businesses that Black and brown people own, they're small businesses in a lot of cases. So I do think the whole access to capital and how the government supports lending and how we define small businesses become a limitation because the category is so broad, from one sole proprietor to 500 or more employees. But Anisha and D'Angelo, please jump in.
I think that's such a great, segue. I think the historical context is so important because it provides context as to why our disparity rates are so strong in the present day. And so when I was looking at these questions, I thought, how are laws discriminatory in nature? And there's traditionally two ways. So there's disparate treatment, which means that on its face, it's discriminatory, such as separate but equal, such as Black codes, such as those Jim Crow laws that have historically marginalized and prevented communities of color from advancing. But then there's also disparate impacts. And that means that the impacts of a policy, a regulation, a law, while on its face may not be discriminatory, it creates a discriminatory nature in that the practices and the impact from the practices are discriminatory. So then we have, for example, gentrification and displacement. We have the financial industry when it comes to the credit box. Then why is this important in addition to what Pam was saying? But it's important to understand that while a lot of laws currently are not, it may not be on its face discriminatory, the impacts of past laws, regulations, and rules continue to prevent and marginalize communities from advancing. And so I think the historical context is so important, in addition to calling out, like Pam said, the SBA 7A products and all of these other things like Fair Housing Acts and everything else. Understand the historical context that while the laws may not on its face be discriminatory, the impacts can have discriminatory nature when it comes to advancing communities of color that has traditionally been marginalized by these policies and laws.
Yeah, that's a very important piece to add into it. Thanks for shedding that nugget on the two sides of the legal coin, because when you think about policy and you think about all the things that have been blatantly done through history towards people of color, and particularly African Americans, if you look at the entire history of the country, I think when you talk about reckoning to rise, I think we have yet to reckon with these are people doing this. This isn't an algorithm that just spit out a random set of standards that we all have to fight and live through. These are people intentionally doing this, or these are people intentionally designing programs. That's one. And the second thing is we oftentimes recognize that relationships are the biggest barrier to entry and the biggest barrier to change. And we fail to grapple with the policy is in concert with the private sector. and the nonprofit sector. And together, these circumstances are arising in communities. And so I think for us, as we peel back the layers, I think we have to really concentrate on there's people that have to change because they have to be better at shaping the transformation. But two, people also in concert with one another, orchestrating, if you will, the current environment in which we find Black and brown communities today.
You know, D'Angelo, she might have just opened up a whole new workshop. Like, I'm like capturing things and then like, hold on, wait a minute. Relationships are the biggest relationship and the barrier to change. That's deep, right? And I agree with you completely. The people element of systems, I'm completely there, that we often talk about systems as though they're inanimate objects that get created without people being behind them. And to your point, Pam, around, do we know the facts about how these systems have come to be? And do we need different systems? I want to lean into what each one of you have talked about at this next question of, are the systems and the tools that we have today the right ones? Pam, you've already asserted that perhaps not, right? Perhaps the definition of small business, 1 to 500, is way too big. It's way too large of a range. Others, are we missing the right tools in order to truly drive the results that we're seeking when we say we want an equitable and inclusive economy? We want all businesses, particularly in this case, Black businesses, to be able to thrive. Do we have the right tools? And if not, what tools do we need?
I can jump in. I'm not 100% sure if we have the right tools or if the application of those tools and those who are responsible, to what D'Angelo's was saying, for the application of those tools actually fuels an inclusive economy and an inclusive growth. What we do know is that today, what has occurred hasn't worked. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here, right? There wouldn't be a conversation about reckoning to rise, because we would be closing those systems and those barriers that Black and brown communities have historically faced. I could say that those systems or tools have worked for those who they were designed to work for. To that extent, I think we need to dismantle the toolbox and recreate something new. We need to recreate the rules. Nothing that was there before really prioritizes marginalized communities. And if it was, then again, we wouldn't need this conversation today. So I think we need to really take a look at the tools that have been put in place, really figure out if the application of those tools have worked or have not worked, and or who has been responsible for pushing these tools out to communities of color. And if not, if we take the analysis, probably already know it's not working, then redesign the toolbox and redesign it in our way. And when I say our way, there should be Black and brown folks at the center and community at the center of what that redesign looks like, and not systems being created and then pushed out to communities, which have historically caused this friction that we're seeing today.
Yeah, I agree, Anisha. It's fascinating because maybe I'm going to bring some examples to the conversation too, because I do think it's right tools and the application of tools, but I often wonder, particularly when it comes down to supporting entrepreneurship and small business, and the way that economic development is defined in this country, it seems to lean into business attraction and large corporations and venture and tech. And somehow the small business and the small businesses in our community are not even in that equation. I think there's a factor in economic development that is overlooked. And although these businesses may not be employing hundreds of people, there's hundreds of businesses employing 8 to 10 people. Plus, these are the paths to wealth creation for most people of color. And so I think that one of the things that we've experimented with in Detroit has been what happens if you provide more affordable access to capital. And there's a continuum in terms of capital that if it's a ladder, typically that first step of the ladder is really high for most businesses. Because if you go into a commercial bank, they're not looking, it costs too much for them to loan you smaller amounts of money. But if you have microfinance organizations, that are typically these nonprofits that can lend micro dollars, if you have CDFIs that are providing lower risk dollars, if you have practical assistance that goes with it, because the PPP scenario has shown us that you can have dollars, but if people don't trust the system or if they don't have a path to those dollars, they're not going to get access to it. And another component is, there's a role with community development organizations in this equation. Who are the trusted connectors on the ground that can help businesses find capital or find the resources they need? And sometimes it's a community development organization in a neighborhood that understands the community, but often aren't seen as a part of that ecosystem of business support. So those are some of the things that we've been wrestling with and reckoning with in Detroit in terms of how to build capacity in all of these types of institutions.
Yeah, the institutional capacity building thing, I think, is a big impediment and kind of a very large roadblock. And as part of the question, I was thinking, when we talked about what are the tools and do we have the right tools, I may be a little contrary here. I do think we have all the tools that we need. Maybe not the nuance of, does this policy is point number 3 activated or is it not activated in a particular region, but I think we have the tools. I think, to Anisha's point, we don't have the master craftsmen in a lot of the positions where we need them. We don't have the people who actually know the full depth and breadth of the tools that are available in order to really activate, or we don't have the master craftsmen with the discretionary resources to actually affect change. And so I think there's a tremendous mismatch between not only those with expertise and those with resources, but also the disconnect between that master craftsman and the tools he or she has access to in their tool belt. Because you may have all these great things about you and you can change your community, you can lend, you can figure out how to go from 1 employee to 5 if you just had access to capital. But those tools aren't available in our neighborhood. Those tools have 1 office and they serve the entire region, and they're located 35 miles outside the city's core Black and brown communities. That tool isn't, even though it's on the shelf, is really not accessible to us. It's really not accessible to those who have the master craftsman, craftswoman skill sets in community. And so I do think there's this mismatch that is a systems challenge of how do we get those tools, whether it's capital, whether it's people, whether it's the institutional support systems, to really be in the hands of the folks who know how to use it and can use it now, and not the folks who don't need it, are simply hoarding it for access and opportunity and power.
Yeah, I appreciate that, D'Angelo's, and I want to go deeper into the heart of that. I retweeted a tweet from a founder yesterday that said it played out his conversation as a founder, where you're saying, I'm a founder, I need resources. And somebody else says, great, I love your idea. Let me give you a mentor. I didn't ask for a mentor. I need resources. Okay, great. Let me introduce you to somebody. I didn't ask for that. I need resources. Well, let me give you an invite to an event. And ask for that, right? And it's this constant back and forth. And I know, Pam, to your point, you're a funder, right? You've been leading a funder collaborative for a long time that's investing dollars. And yet that's in the place of power and privilege. And I think, D'Angelo's, yours is like power. We want to get to this heart of often. You've got the tools, you got the ideas, everybody's loving you, but power, right? Who's sitting in the place where the power and the dollars start to move, such that if you've got the ideas, you've got the resource, you might even have the team. But without those tools, how do we start to marry this place where the word capacity often gets used to mean some coded language that may not actually be what's needed in the community? And how do we begin to marry the creativity, brilliance, tools in community, Black community, with where power is often held, where tools are being used and held to get to the results we need? How does that happen? What's happening in Detroit? What's happening in Minneapolis, St. Paul, other places? And what do we actually need to have happen?
I'll start and quickly pivot, because I think power dynamics are undergoing another iteration of change, right? There's this pandemic that has forced power to be distributed differently. People, through social media over the last 10 plus years, have been able to elevate their individual power, create followings, distribution channels, then resources begin to flow to those folks. And so I think power dynamics are shifting, right? But the point that I made earlier about relationship trumps everything. And it's the strongest form of power that we have as believers, as community residents, as folks inside your family. It's the one thing that unites you. And I don't think we've developed the language to really articulate the power dynamics around relationship. And if this is your person, this is your go-to, this is your person that you made your first million with, there's nothing I can do to change that relationship in your life. There's only things I can put pressure on you, external, but I can't internally change that relationship dynamic. That grantee who's done great work, you've been a VP and now you're an executive director because that grantee performed, that I can't do anything with that. And so we have to recognize that this is a cohort solution. This isn't an individual. We can't change one lever and then all the rain falls to the rest of the people. It's like, no, there's a cohort of a generation demographically that's different that we have to intentionally equip with the relationships and power to plant those seeds of transformation. And that's kind of what I see starting to happen on the fringes. And I'm hoping there are market leaders in the larger institutions who are willing to cut through the fat and minutia of planning, studies, and reports and build relationship with those master craftspeople in community to get the resources to them. Because in our community, and this is where I'll stop, we are an emerging market if you were to consider us in all economic standards compared to other parts. We are an emerging market. We have young, talented people that are ready. We have middle-aged people who have experience from different levels and they're ready. And we have seasoned folks who just never got that last chance to get into that leadership role with the discretion, and we are ready.
Yeah, this whole conversation on power is really important. And also, I think I'm sitting here, I was teasing Anisha and D'Angelo earlier, because I'm the furthest one away from Minneapolis and probably the furthest one away from age in terms of the leadership that they carry. You know, and as a person that's approaching 60 years old and you've come up in this environment, it is a challenge to talk about how do you work within the system that you're given, and then how do you push against it to disrupt it? And I think this conversation is fascinating because from my position, and I don't know if it's age or experience, it's how do you work within it to try to move more resources and dollars to those that you need? How do you try to create mediation between the grassroots organizations and the people that hold the resources? Who has that skill where it's not one versus the other? But at the same time, I'm inspired by when I talk to my daughter, when I talk to my, her peers, and when I talk to, you listen to these individuals, there's a disruptiveness that's required that I think even people in my generation and in my seat need to embrace that and learn that as well. There is an interesting thing that happens too when I look at even Detroit, one of the blackest cities in the country. If you look at who's in leadership in Detroit, it doesn't represent who lives there, and the people that are running the organizations, the CEO tables, you still are dealing with very few people of color. And it's not just black, it's people of any color. And then oftentimes it's women aren't always represented. And so that goes back to your point, D'Angelo, about how the role of power and the role of relationships, and how do you help those that have grown up in that system, right, find the voice and the platform and the courage to push against it and go beyond just operating within it. I hope that makes sense, but listening to you, it just really activated something in me that I wanted to share that perspective.
I love that, Pam, and appreciate that. I think that's part of the reckoning that we have to do both within community and across generations and across the leadership spheres. And there may be a need for both and. I think there is a need for both and the more that we're able to talk about that, the faster we start to move the solutions. I want to talk about place. We have been in the Twin Cities wrestling with and continuing to wrestle with the impact of not only the current impacts of the last year on different neighborhoods and Black businesses and how we build back better, but generations of not having the infrastructure that's needed for those businesses to thrive. How do we keep community centered as we build back better, as we reimagine? What does it look like to you all to have opportunities for Black business owners to thrive in place, to own and develop and grow firms and develop properties all at the same time? DeAngelos, we know this is your space.
I was hoping to take a few minutes away from speaking, but I will say the importance of a shared vision is incredibly, is going to be the resilient factor, right? I think there's and to the point that Pamela and Anisha made earlier, there's not a bridge currently between the people who live in neighborhoods and leadership in a lot of places. Leadership is often removed physically from community. They're often removed financially. They're often removed in a number of ways across the board. And so you have institutional decision makers who are not a part of the organic visioning process, except through a third-party consultant who may or may not be representative of the community. And I think there's going to need to be a real bridge building initiative, because I think the divide, especially here in the Twin Cities, has reached a point where I don't think you get to it with just capital. Like, I don't think we could just open a lake of water and expect to be able to put out fires. I think we need to really be cognizant about who's controlling the fire hose, who's putting the resources into the community, who decided what gets rebuilt first, and then what is the vision? Because if you rebuild what was there already, you just rebuilt what didn't work for Black people. And Black History Month, I'm gonna say Black people and focus on it today. It didn't work. So if you tell me that I want to just get back to some kind of normal, you're essentially creating an environment where you're creating hostility towards my livelihood, hostility towards my family, towards my children's education. And now I can't build a relationship with you at all to even get to a point where I trust you. And so how do you see that humanity in me? Not just I need to create some triage and rebuild a building. It's like, no, there's a humanity part of me that my life has been disrupted. And if you want to rebuild what was here before and it was already a threat to my family, we're going to have continued problems. And so I think there's, this is a big picture coming all the way down. That bridge building is going to be magnificently important for the sustainability of any rebuild effort. Otherwise, we're simply putting buildings, reinforcing displacement and gentrification strategies. The economics of those buildings don't tie to the people in the community. And so now we have a displaced group of people who are even more hostile than before because of their disenfranchisement. And so I'm gonna pause and let others step in.
I think that was great, DeAngelos. You actually took the words right off of my paper. I would just add that in addition to a shared agenda, I think we have to really get to the heart of the communal aspect, because historically, until this point, we have built wealth or built power or built all of these systems individually. And I think, to DeAngelos' point, also calling out African-American communities, the worst thing that could have happened to us was desegregation, because at the heart of that, we lost our sense of community, right? During segregation, we focused on doing business together. We focused on relying on each other for our educational system and all of these other systems that now have been used to marginalize us. And it's beautiful right now, especially in the Twin Cities, to see this cooperative economic movement that is spurring up, and we're getting to really the heart of the communal aspect, but we need to really really push that further. Like, we need to define what community really means. Are we talking about the business community, the property ownership community? What community are we going after? And then create shared agendas so that we're all pushing the same agenda, so that when others come and try to divide us, we actually are pushing the same thing. And that's a way to keep the power within our community that historically has never happened before.
Absolutely. I'm in the chat, I'm in the tweets all over. Y'all making me get my church fan. This is it. That the thought about just whose vision, right? Whose vision, who gets to own the vision. But that thought about, we don't often pause there to say who gets to create the vision, and how do we center those people in the vision as the tools start to come forward. Anisha, you are at an institution that is fueling dollars forward for redevelopment, for building, both for businesses and often for bricks and mortar. Pam, you're doing the same. DeAngelis, you're centered in the middle of that, often between not only developers and business owners, but also cities. How do those tools, how do we get enough space to pause in the moment? The how, I think many people could be nodding right now saying, okay, that sounds good. Yep, sounds right. Amen, corner. But the how does it happen?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the things that we're saying, what I often find is that there are not enough times where people are asking a Black business owner or a Latinx business owner, a Middle Eastern business owner in Detroit, what do you actually need? You know, the feedback loop is just short, right? It's a lot of people assuming what they need. It's a lot of people assuming what they think the factors of the barriers are, but not enough conversation with what I call the experiential experts that are actually living and breathing and operating in the space that we all are saying is so important to the work that we do. And one of the things that the pandemic brought on in the city of Detroit was that recognition of the fissures that are in our system. And one of those big fissures was the fact that no one was talking to businesses enough. And when tables were being formed in support of small businesses, the business owner that was asked to join that table was typically a large, very successful business owner. And in our position, that owner that was asked to join, she was the one that stopped. Black woman, has a company of about 100 or so employees. And she said, wait a minute, I'm not going to be your token here. I'm not going to do this unless we actually engage real business owners in neighborhoods to now sit at this table with us. So that's a how. And people stopped long enough to do it. And we worked with her to identify, went to the community development organizations, went to the chambers. We have a National Business League office in Detroit, the Hispanic chambers, the Arab American Chamber. We went to the CDOs and our grantees and said, help us identify business owners that can represent who we're talking about here. And we were able to identify about 12 or so of them. Again, they're not representative of the whole pie, but it is a move in the right direction. The other thing that we've started to do is surveying of business owners. We're relying on a lot of national data about what it's saying about what's happening with cash flows with Black businesses, what's happening with PPP with Black businesses. We had to do our own surveying within Wayne County to see what we learned for ourselves, right? And so I think those are other hows. But the feedback loop has been too short for too long. If we're supporting these types of businesses and these types of business owners are not in the conversation, it's not working, and it's not respectful either.
Absolutely. I love that the chat is blowing up with the experiential experts, as is Twitter, that the people and business owners who live in the neighborhoods are the experiential experts. That has been core throughout this entire Reckoning series, that we are our own experts, right? And in living the experience, that makes you an expert, not reading a book on it, not studying it, not a degree in it, not running a nonprofit in it, but the lived experience. And we have to elevate that. And I love that example, Pam, that having one person who stood up and said, nope, I'm not going down for that. I'm not going to be the one person who represents I'm going to bring my peers or I'm not going to be a part of it, that can be enough to stop those systems that you all have been talking about this whole time. I want to go to some of the questions from the chat and from our audience in our last 10 or 15 minutes here. So we have a question from somebody who is from Detroit first, who says, my organization is in this area. And this one is about the limitations for accessing capital. How can someone, and this could be anywhere, how can someone who really wants to revitalize distressed communities and encourage economic growth where there's an impact among the overlooked areas in Detroit? And maybe you all could respond to this one, but how can folks begin to access capital for revitalization in those neighborhoods that are truly the most distressed and seeking resources? How can they access capital for that?
Yeah, I'll start, and then I would love to hear what's going on in other communities. I do believe that, I said this in the earlier part of the conversation, the continuum of capital typically starts too high, and we have to support nonprofit lenders. We cannot, the role that CRF plays nationally, there's also local place-based CDFIs. And then oftentimes, those CDFIs are still giving loans that are $50,000 and up. The micro-lending and the credit building types of activities are so important. And so until we get the lower rungs of the ladder figured out, it's going to be a challenge. But microfinance organizations, CDFIs, and the challenge with CDFIs, some would say that they also are relying on a system of approval that's tied to the system that D'Angelo talked about, right? So those have to be disrupted. But the other thing too is they still need grant capital so that they can de-risk their lending, because if a CDFI is lending at 7% because you're supposedly high risk, the grant capital has to de-risk that, because that doesn't seem fair either, right? When you can go to a commercial bank and get a loan for a lot less. But anyway, I'm repeating myself. But microfinance organizations, credit building programs, microfinance or micro lending, small business lending, and I think in this moment you can't discount the role that grants play, stabilization grant dollars that are going directly to businesses in some of our communities because of the level of low-income individuals. The charitable purpose, you can justify that charitable purpose with moving grant dollars to businesses directly, which is what also has happened in Detroit through competitions, but also through just relief dollars.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Pam. Anisha, I want to ask you this question specifically about CRF, and I'd love if you could weave in anything you're doing as well as it relates to your personal business and helping Black business owners as well. Can you talk about the work that CRF and other CDFIs are able to do to help grow Black and Brown businesses, and how the audience can help in their own ways as well in the work with CDFIs, and specifically how investments might be able to drive as a tool and a lever for growth?
Yes, sure. So CRF is a community development financial institution, and my role is the Director of Advancement Twin Cities. And in this capacity, I work with local stakeholders, such as technical assistance providers, such as MEDA, the Latino Economic Development Center, philanthropy, which is the role that Pam plays, to say and see how we can create a more responsive financial industry that meets really the needs of underbanked and underserved communities. As Tawana shared in her opening, it is unfairly hard for many small business owners, particularly women, BIPOC, new business owners, to obtain capital. However, capital, like D'Angelo said, isn't the main thing. There needs to be some value add to that capital to ensure that these small business owners are set up for success from jump. And CRF does this by investing in and activating our community development ecosystem in connection with an entire spectrum of capital sources, government, stakeholders, key civic engagement leaders, and also local mission development organizations to channel capital and also that technical assistance into economically challenged communities. We aim really to be a capital enhancer through our innovative financial tools such as technology and services. And then we work with partners like MEDA, like Latino Economic Development Center, or the Catalyst Coalition and Pair Capital with value add to better serve our community. And then to that extent, we have seen a lot of success. Like Pam hit on earlier, we worked with our local community partners to deploy over $10 million in PPP loans. We're actively also taking PPP loans in this third round. We're also working with community partners to develop products and solutions and services that meet the needs of that community. I think Pam hit on this earlier. Historically, products, services, solutions have been designed and then pushed to community. CRF has taken a step back, especially in light of COVID and also George Floyd, to see how do we actively design products and solutions with the community at its center, instead of just pushing products and solutions to community and telling them they need this. And why does this matter, I guess? And it matters because by creating scalable, equitable opportunities for historically underserved communities, we are cultivating new income growth, building multi-generational wealth, creating quality jobs for low-income people, and maximizing economic mobility and opportunity for all. So that's a long way to say we're not just doing this alone. We can't do this alone. I think D'Angelo's hit on that earlier. It takes truly an ecosystem approach in order to really move the barriers and the systematic issues that have historically marginalized communities. And my role is, how do we work together, collaboratively together, knowing CRF can only play but a certain role into moving this forward and really dismantling those barriers.
I appreciate that last note, both particularly about the pieces of it that have to be done together. And CRF is such a huge player, not only in Minnesota, but across the country, and is able to bring so many tools to bear. But I think to the points that you all raised earlier, the wide range of businesses that exist and the ability for a person like you to be in there to help CRF see businesses, particularly Black-owned businesses, through a new lens is something that our community is truly going to benefit from more and more over time. And I appreciate the audience asking ways that they can also lean in and be supportive in those efforts to see these businesses grow and help our economy grow as well. I want to invite each one of you to share a closing thought. What can our audience be thinking about to ensure that Black-owned businesses are a growing part of our economy, and that we're all playing the role that we need to play in using our agency to the fullest extent?
I'll be remiss in not sharing just a couple quick examples of why this is so important, what Anisha said, what D'Angelo's has talked about and laid out. Adrian Bennett, Vincari Engineering in Detroit, started off as a very small plumbing and electrical engineering and manufacturing company, and couldn't get a lot of support from traditional paths. Won a business plan competition, was able to buy an estimating tool that allowed her to increase the types of customers she was estimating projects for. Landed the Little Caesars Arena project. Forward fast, 8 years. She now has over 30 employees, and these are employees that are making $90,000, $70,000, dollars a year. African American men and women that are in this particular sector. That's why it's important. Not only did she create jobs for the people in her community, she created wealth for herself, and her son is following in her footsteps. So Naila Ellis, who is Ellis Island Tea, who you can find her tea in Sam's Club, started with an idea, a recipe from her grandfather, and no money. But she was gritty about it, and she pursued competitions and capital, and she had other Black founders invest in her, other successful Black people invest in her, and now her products is Sam's Club. So I just wanted to put faces and names with the conversation, because that's so important to understand. When we do this right, it's not only building proximate jobs for people in our community, it's also building the wealth of those individuals that could now pass that down to their children and their community. So that's my closing thought, but I had to at least bring those living examples into the conversation.
When we do this right, I love it. Thank you, Pam.
D'Angelo, you want me to go? I can go real quick. I'll say, you know, the vision for Building Back Better is, you know, better is Black communities thriving to me, and marginalized communities thriving, Black and Latinx communities thriving. I think for so long, the goal historically has been just surviving, but what does it look like when we thrive? And that looks like not only growing successful and thriving businesses, but it's increasing ownership. I know we didn't really get into the heart of that, but increasing not just property ownership, but commercial ownership. It's creating a stronger relationship with financial institutions. The reality is those businesses that were able to take advantage of PPP, it was because they had relationships, which D'Angelo hit on, with these financial institutions that were able to put their applications to the forefront. And I think it's overall really continuing to challenge these systems and these policies that have historically been designed to marginalize us as a people. I think that Pam talked about this earlier, but we're getting to a point of we're no longer asking or accepting the status quo as is. And we should be here. We should be tired of sitting here talking about this. So in 20 years, we're not talking about what was, but what happened and what progress that we have made thus far.
That's awesome. And so tying these two together and kind of the previous stuff that we said, one, we're in a cohort model. Like we're all in this kind of career at the same time, and then there's another generation that's going to replace us, right? To the story that Pamela gave around the Dakari engineering, that one person, life is now changed. Their family's life has changed. And so if I were to think about my family, I have a very clear mobility story where my grandfather moved from the Mississippi Delta, got a job at Metro Transit in Chicago, got a job at Metro Transit here in the Twin Cities, sent for my grandmother and 5 children 3 years later. Now that entire half of the family has a different family trajectory because one person had mobility in a career field. Now we talk about entrepreneurship and going from one as an individual to 30 employees. What is the mobility story that we are creating? And so what we are starting to talk about as post George Floyd is how are we planting seeds of transformation in our company? Because we don't need to create the entire full spectrum wraparound change for one person. But what seeds of transformation can I plant in that family, in that small business, that then changes the trajectory and the mobility story for their entire family? And I think that's where we have to get to in a right now moment, is that I can't change your history. I can't change all the things that you bring, but I can now help put you on a path that changes your entire family's trajectory.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. I am so honored to be in solidarity with one another, with each one of you. I'm so grateful to be in solidarity with each one of our attendees who have just been lighting the chat and the tweets on fire. I know they are inspired by each of you, but more than that, I know that they are set on a path toward deeper action and accountability because of what each of you have elevated today. Not only your recommendations, but also the actions that you've elevated that they can take on, that we can take on together in this work to move Black businesses forward, to move Black generations forward. Thank you for each of you for the work that you do every day and for doing that work with us here at the Center for Economic Inclusion and in our communities. I want to say a big thank you to each one of our attendees today. I want to remind you to take full advantage of the survey that you will see as we wrap up the Zoom on today. We want your feedback. We want to know what other topics you all want us to take on. The Reckoning series does not end today. We're going to come back to you again next Thursday with Reckoning with the Heart of Philanthropy, because we know that sometimes philanthropy and investments can be at odds with how we move our community toward, again, not just jobs, but we want to move toward wealth equity, and beyond. So please come back right back here again next Thursday at noon. Go spend your dollars with Black-owned businesses. Go use your agency to move investments in these businesses, including those that you just heard from on today. And please continue the chat online. We thank you so much. Have a great day.